Do you think it's possible to be good without doing good? I mean, is it possible to stay out of trouble and at the same time, really not do anything for someone in trouble? Hey, welcome to Journey at Home. I am Matt, and our goal is to create content that makes it simple for you to follow Jesus and live a better life. So if you haven't yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you know when we release new content for you. Let's get started today. See, most people believe you don't have to do good to be good. In other words, it's possible to be financially responsible and be selfish at the same time. It's possible to be self-controlled and you can still be judgmental. It's possible to have integrity and not have any sympathy. It's possible to be careful as a person but uncaring towards the persons around you. But my question is, does that really make you a good person? I'm not sure that kind of good is worth much, is it? Now, if you're not a Christian, I'm really glad you're watching today because I'll admit, Christians, we are often guilty of this. It is easy for us to focus on being good, but we don't actually do much good. And if you feel like that kind of good is good for nothing, I actually think Jesus would agree with you. If you had said to Jesus, hey, it's possible to be good and still not do good things. No, it's possible to be a good person without doing good for another person. I think he would have strongly disagreed. And I know that because the Jewish religious leaders of the first century, they had some real issues with Jesus because he did not encourage that kind of behavior in them. I mean, these guys, they pace the field in being good, but not doing good for anybody. And Jesus repeatedly called them out, which is why they wanted to kill him and ultimately had him crucified. The problem was, he was so popular with the crowd that for a long time they were scared to do anything to him. So they came up with a strategy to trick Jesus into saying something that might turn the crowd on him so that they'd be able to get to him. And this is one of those times what I'm going to share with you today. These guys, they sent 3 groups of people to ask Jesus some trick questions. And the first group failed. The second group failed. And finally, they send this expert in the law to give it one more try. And here's what Luke tells us happened. He says, on this occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. And here's how he tested him. He said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, the answer to that question was actually in their Jewish scriptures. And Jesus knew this was a test, so he replies with a question in return. He says, well, what's written in your law? How do you read it? And this lawyer, he recites an answer that he had learned as a child, but then he adds a bonus answer that he had heard Jesus give another time. He says, well, in addition to that, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. That's in our scriptures. And he says you should love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus, I think, kind of smiles and says, you've answered correctly. You do this, and you're going to live. And then Jesus turns to answer somebody else's question in the crowd. But this expert isn't done. I mean, he just can't help himself because Jesus has just made clear that our love for God is demonstrated and authenticated by our love for people. In other words, you can't be good. I love God. I'm a good person without doing good, without loving your neighbor. But who wants that kind of accountability? It's a lot easier to be good than it is to do good any day. And so Luke tells us that this lawyer wanted to justify himself. Don't we all? Don't you want to believe you're a good person? I mean, if you're a Christian, you want to believe you're a good person who's good with God. We don't want anybody to challenge whether that's true for us. But Jesus just did. And this lawyer's trying to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? Now, to a Jew in this context, he would only consider other Jews to be his neighbor. And so what he's basically asking is, all right, what's the minimum amount of loving my neighbor that I need to do to be good? What's the fewest number of Jews, the smallest subset of Jews that I can love? And I've hit the threshold. I'm okay. Because I'm not really interested in doing any more good than is necessary to make me good with God. I barely want to pass the test. D's get degrees. So show me the line for just the bare minimum. But in typical Jesus fashion, he does not answer this guy's question directly. He tells a story. Maybe you've heard it before. Jesus said, there was a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers, and everybody in his crowd's going, wait a minute, weren't we just talking about neighbors? How do we get to robbers? But they understood this road. It was a 17-mile road that was rocky. It was dangerous. It wasn't unusual for somebody to be robbed while they were traveling it. So Jesus says, all right, this guy's going down. He gets robbed. These robbers strip him of his clothes. They beat him, and then they go away, leaving this guy half dead on the side of the road. And half dead meant you probably wouldn't see the sunrise the next morning without being, full dead. Either you'd die from the cold or you would die from animals killing you. And into this extreme situation, Jesus introduces 2 people who are good at being good. He says a priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And then he says a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. So these are two good Jewish religious leaders who saw their Jewish neighbor in danger and did nothing good to help him. But Jesus isn't finished. He said, now there was a third guy. And this is where Jesus' famous twist into the story is introduced. He says there was a Samaritan. Now, Jews and Samaritans, they hated each other. There's a cultural history behind that. But the people listening to this story, they probably already assumed a Samaritan was the robber. A Samaritan was the one who committed the crime. But Jesus is about to make the Samaritan the hero of the story. He's about to elevate him above these Jewish people. This is not exactly how to win friends and influence people, but Jesus is making a point. He says a Samaritan, as he traveled, he came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, he bandaged up his wounds, he poured oil and wine on him. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, he took care of him. And then Jesus takes it the extra mile. He says the next day the Samaritan took out 2 denarii, he gave them to the innkeeper. He said, you look after this Jewish man who was beaten. When I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. I mean, Jesus just rubs it in by letting the Samaritan be the guy who goes the extra mile in doing good. What's so impactful about this is in one story, Jesus has redefined what neighbor means. It's not just a little Jewish subset anymore. He's redefined neighbor to include everybody from every nation and every generation. And then he looks at this Jewish expert in the law and he says, you wanted to know who your neighbor is. Well, let me ask you a question. Which of the 3 men in my story do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And this expert in the law looks back and says, well, it's the one who had mercy on him. You know, he can't even bring himself to say it's a Samaritan. But it was obvious. And now this expert in the law knows he's accountable. And now, well, we're all accountable, right? Because it's obvious being good isn't good enough. Jesus just blew that up. Now we have to admit that good people are actually the people who see a need and meet it. They're the people who know there's something that they can do, and they're willing to do it. They're the ones who don't talk themselves out of it. Now it's impossible to convince ourselves that I'm a good person if I'm not doing good for people on a regular basis, because loving our neighbor has no boundaries, because God's love has no boundaries. Our love for God is now measured by how well we love everybody from every nation and every generation. So Jesus looks at this man and he simply tells him, I want you to go and do likewise. In other words, Jesus' marching orders to him and to us are simply, be the Samaritan. Jesus doesn't need any more admirers. That's not what he was here to do. He had plenty of those, it doesn't really help. Jesus wants more followers. Jesus doesn't even need more prayers. Now, I'm all for prayer, but what good is it to walk by a wounded man and say, hey, I'll pray for you? Jesus needs more prayers who are actually doers. So this season that we're in right now as a church is when we come together as a movement, and I remind us that we're not going to be a church of good people. We're going to be a church of good people doing good things for all people, because doers are the ones who change the world. Now, if you're new to this, we're kicking off our annual 4 offering season. And this is how it works. A team of volunteers in our church, they contact nonprofits doing great work in our communities, and they ask them, well, what would make a big difference for you, and what would help you make a big difference? And then they vet those projects. They make sure the nonprofits are solid and that they're doing great work. And we fund as many of these projects at these nonprofits as we can with an annual offering. Now, we've been doing this locally and regionally for a few years now. We're going to give as much as we can possibly give, and then we're going to give every single dollar away, and we're going to show you where we give it away and the impact it makes. That's a lot of fun. But here's what's a little bit different about this year from the last few years. Your good, your generosity is going to make a huge difference locally and regionally. But this year we're going to expand nationally and globally, because our neighbor isn't just the people in our own community. It's everybody in every nation in every generation. So here's how we're going to make an impact. Your generosity is going to fund projects for nonprofits locally and regionally who are providing food for people facing food insecurity. It's going to help senior adults. It's going to help kids who are in at-risk situations. You'll provide resources for nonprofits who rescue and serve these kids who are in dangerous or difficult circumstances. You're going to help foster families. You're going to help foster children who need a loving and stable environment. I mean, locally and regionally, your generosity is going to continue to support these nonprofit organizations that are making a big difference right where we live. But we are also going to expand our impact nationally. We're going to help some folks around the U.S. and Canada who are trying to start churches like ours in their communities that don't have a church like ours. Now, you don't know this, but you've actually been making a difference in this area over the last year because of what you've done here. We have been part of a team that has built out coaching content for church planners. And in October, we began training 5 of these church planners in Canada, Bangor, Maine, Raleigh, North Carolina, Texas. We're giving them our playbook. We're doing everything we can to help them create churches like ours in their community. And some of your money this year is going to help support financially getting those new churches off the ground. So that's a little bit of the national impact. And you're going to make an impact internationally as well because of what you're doing right here. We've also been invited to partner with a church in Hampshire, England, that's trying to be a church like ours right there in their community. So for the next year, we're going to come alongside that church. We're going to help them go further, faster too. We're going to provide coaching and resources if they need it. We're going to learn from them and get better by learning from them. We're going to take groups over to work with them. We're going to financially help them. So some of your money from this offering is now going to do good in England, where only 4% of people are going to church right now. Now, why would we do that? Well, first of all, it's our responsibility to be a good steward of the influence and the learnings that God has given us. I mean, what's happening here is unique, and while we're never going to take our focus off of reaching people locally, we do have a responsibility to use everything God is teaching us to help people wherever they are when they need help. So this year, I'm asking you to give with no strings attached and to be the Samaritan. Let's just not focus on us. Let's not even focus on our own community. Let's be open-handed and define neighbor the way that Jesus did. So what I want to encourage you to do right now, if you want to be a part of this, open up our app, or you can go to givejourney.com, select the annual for fund, and make a big gift. As always, our goal is not a dollar amount. It's 100% participation. And so I would love for you, our Journey at Home community, to be a part of making a difference with us. And all of this money will be given away to make an impact. Don't just be good, do good, because it's the only kind of good that God says is good to be. Let's be a movement that loves our neighbor from every nation, from every generation. And let's make an impact in our world together. The opportunities, they've never been bigger for us to show people that we are for them, but more importantly, God is for them too. So, go give big.